early 1950s. I'm going to Berkeley. Tuition, not free anymore. It's really sad. It's $37.50 for people to come from all over the earth to the American West to live and start a new life. And yes, our population, when the story starts, is around 3 million people. Fast forward to the year 1900, and suddenly we are 100 million people. They didn't come from being babies. They came from people from all over the earth taking advantage of these laws. Okay, that's the background. Let's go to work. We're walking and talking.
Walk and talk. Can you turn off your radio?
Tell him.
This building serves two purposes. The main hook for the railroad guys to build the building with light there and work night. Secondly, Mr. Jr. did a great. You're scared.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Hop in.
Look up here. Building a railroad, first of all, if you're not from around here, that's on the lake. Lake Tahoe's over that way. You know, it's about 50 miles straight east right there. Interstate 5 is right up the other side. All right.
Hey, pop in.
Pop in where? They're going to build a railroad. They came for the gold.
Yeah, video.
In fact, in Chinese literature, folklore, history, this is called Gold Mountains, not called Sierra Nevada. Gold Mountains. And so what happened? Well, this is 10, 12 years after the gold strike. So the gold isn't as easy to find, so they're kind of willing to work for the railroad. But the railroad needed tons of them. And get this, see that Donner Summit tunnel right there? It's going to take 11,000 gunpowder. It's not going to really blow up much, but it's going to make you use your hammer and chisel both back over 200 times. I know what I'm talking about. You got to have a 12-foot ledge on the side of the mountain to put your railroad tracks. And so you've got to make a ledge there. If you're going to go to a double track, you've got to go about 20, 25 people. That's more modern. So that exists today. This one is no longer in use. But it was once upon a time. Today the track goes right to the other side of that peak. And in the 1920s, after we had dynamite and TNT, they were able to build a 2-mile long tunnel that is double track, and it took them 5 months. Okay, almost a year and a half to go through 1,600 feet. Now, how did they really do this? How did they really bore into the mountain there and make the sled? Our ladies here are going to demonstrate. So look up there and see what you're doing is pretending you're banging this sledgehammer into the side of the wall. Okay, so turn the facts.
Last year I was in 4th grade and I learned about this. They put them down in baskets and they would put it inside the mountain and then they would set it on fire and they would try to get them up as fast as they could.
Yeah, and they're right, because they did use gunpowder. You're right about that. And honestly, we don't know how many died. We don't know, we just don't know because they basically were hired what they call ward groups from China, 150 at a time, and they came with the Chinese foreman and they stayed together. Okay, fire away. Real fast. Very good. Now you're getting tired. You get tired. Okay, fast. They're good enough. The deal here is, she's banging on a piece of rebar, but up there, where you see the sledgehammer, it has 5 little lines in it, and when you hit it, it makes a turn about 1/4 of an inch. So they called it a star drill. It was never a drill, it was just the hammering like you saw right here. But that's how they did it, and eventually they had to go on all 4 edges and maybe not the bottom edge so much, but then they would come off the mountain, it would like peel off, and eventually you would get your 12-foot ledge. And that's how this railroad got built. Only the Chinese seem to know how to do that. Because I have to say one bad thing about Stanford, so here I go. He said those little Chinamen are never going to work on my magnificent railroad. Well, the main builder guy, well, the big four was Mr. Crocker. And Crocker said to Stanford, he says, Stanford, who built the Great Wall of China? Duh. And what's it built out of? Solid granite. He says, I bet they can build this railroad better than anybody. And it sure proved out to be right. Okay, enough of that. Let's go up the hill now. How good were the Chinese?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Very, very, very good.
The Santa Fe is a great train.
This is one of the oldest
Good
records
train.
in the Guinness Book of World's Record, and it is still survives today, 153 years after it actually happened. 10 miles of track in one day, built by hand.
Wow.
And that's pretty amazing.
That's amazing.
Okay, now we're around the corner here. Along the way here, I got a few more paths up things to show you. Here's one of them right here. Please pass this around.
Better when I now
Talk about it. I'm going to quickly use this and then pass it around. Okay. When you're up in a mountain building a railroad, obviously the tip of the mountain's going to go like this, but it's also going to go in and out. When it goes in, there's some airspace. What can you do with the airspace? You've got to build a wooden trestle or a land bridge. If it's only 10 or 15 feet high, then we do what you see here, rock over the side of it with air. When you look down here, it meant you were on a trestle 150 years ago, so it gets filled in. Now, if you've got a really big trestle, which is going to pass around, this trestle is way bigger than anything you see. Here's the Chinese months. This trestle is one. So we're going to go again. Around the corner.
That's insane.
We've got two
That's
places
insane.
here.
This is sick.
Like right now would be the best time to do your own thing now.
No, let's just finish it. It's almost over. About halfway. What?
National strategy. National strategy is referring now to the width of the track. The law that set up the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 said that it had to have a standard gauge, which means the trains have to be the same width of the track. Doesn't that make a lot of sense?
Yes.
Well, we didn't have that before this railroad. Back east, you would have states on purpose. They would make their, so you have to get off their train and use yours in your state. Well, we changed all that. Even back states have it. Back states they had to change. So 95% of the earth uses this, honestly. It's 4 feet, 8.5 inches. Right now, the war in Ukraine makes a big difference. I noticed this was yesterday's paper. I used the Liberal B and the conservative Wall Street Journal. But almost so because we were the publishers Wall Street Journal. Anyway, right now, over in Ukraine, they're talking about, maybe the Russians are going to come through from the Belarus side and into there, into Ukraine. They're going to have a heck of a time because once you get more than a few miles in, it's nice to have trains to bring up all of your supplies and your troops and so on. And they can't do it because the Russian rail is 5 foot inch in the corner. So it does make a difference. Germans and the Russians have just made a huge difference in the outcome of the war. All right, the clocks. This was hard to believe too. We take time for granted today, but you know what you had before this first transcontinental railroad? You would have people wanting to go from New York to Chicago, and they No schedules, with any numbers. Trains would advertise that maybe they got a special kind of car on the train or whatever. But they would say train leaving in the morning. In the morning. No numbers. Or it might say in the afternoon or in the evening. Well, that's not going to work. If you're going to really send a train across America, you better have printed schedules of when to catch the train in New York City, when it's going to get to Philadelphia, how long it's going to be in the station, partial arrival time, departure time, all the way across the nation. So to do that, you have to have standard time zones where the time, you know what they had back in the middle 1860s and before? Each railroad company decided what time their time was their own time. They had watches. If it was Baltimore, Ohio Railroad, they had their own time. It would be posted on the wall of Grand Central Station, New York City. And it varies between modern time and the time of the day based on the clocks that people already had. So having standardized time made railroading a lot easier too. Okay, and look at that go this way now. And we're going to talk about things with the railroads. Interesting things we hope to see. Back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, that kind of time before steel, you can't bend iron very easily, but can you see it bending up there? If it's long enough, it'll bend. You heat it up, it'll bend. But the point is, we're going to introduce something the railroading industry really got in on, and that was the idea of prefabrication. This bridge is actually a real bridge. It has been in 3 states.
Wow.
New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, in different mining towns, and each time they call it being played out, whatever was tin or copper, maybe even gold. They're going to move the bridge to the next place where they got a creek that they have to run a railroad over, and they can take this apart. So there's no welds here, but there are bolts. You can see that's a really big one right there. It's going to take about 5 guys to turn that bolt. But there's nothing longer here on any one of these pieces. Look at the up here that is longer than a flat car, 50-foot flat car. So this bridge has actually moved 4 times, and the 4th time was right here, just to show you what I'm trying to show you right now. Hey, we're shooting at this one.
So is de verdad?
Yeah, like the actual.
I'm like my
That's
mom.
it. Wow.
Yeah, this is actual, like, they're not kidding.
Right here, long enough to make you realize there's another prefab right there. I mean, come just a little bit further so you can get the idea of what this is. This is a combination post office and train station. And if you look through you can walk around there later and see what I'm talking about much more. But I told you before, we changed our population hugely between, let's say, 1855 and the year 1900. So tens and tens of millions of people came to American West. So what? So we got a whole bunch of new towns all over the place. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, et cetera, and eventually all these places that were territories become states. But the point is, you're going to need something in that new town. You're going to need a post office and you're going to need a railroad station. So why not combine them, and why not get your place out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog? So here's a number 5 train and post office station. You can go over there and learn more about it later on if you want. The real lady there, that picture right there, but you can see her also there. The person is actually running this place, who is the mother of these 2 children up here, and that cat. And she's not the mother of the cat, but the cat's part of the cat. She is the telegrapher. She is the telephone operator. She is the station master, which means she sells tickets to ride trains, but more importantly, she gets information over her telephone, or more likely her telegraph, which she will turn on and stick and hand up to the engineer that's superintendent's right here, and he'll tell him how far forward he can go before he'll have to get up on the siding, because back in the day, almost everything was just single track with lots of sidings. and as the postmistress and so on, she's in charge of handing out the mail and so forth through that window right there. Okay, let's go this way. Okay, and museum talk, this is called a relic. I mean, it's a piece of junk, but it's a very historical piece of junk, because this piece of junk is the only car or engine that is still left from Promontory, Utah. This took Governor Stanford and Mr. Crocker up to Promontory for the ceremony, and this car was built right here in Sacramento. I'll show you a place a little further on the tour where these were actually built. But it looks pretty bad, doesn't it? And that's because after years and years of being used by the railroad, by about 1900, Hollywood becomes Hollywood. And one of their most important genre of films were the cowboy films. And this car has been in 28 films. Every film it's been in between 1939 and 1978 has had a different name on it. So this was the name on it in 1978.
Wow.
I know I'm the oldest one of almost every crowd. But has anybody ever heard of Henry Fonda? The story of Jesse James. He robs his train in 1939. And how about Elvis, the King? His first movie, Lovely Timber. And this car. He didn't rob it, but even the girls did. And the last movie was 1978. And there's the name of the train in that movie. And the guy's name is Kenny Rogers. The movie is called The Gambler.
Oh, that was good.
Okay, now, why is it in such a mess? Well, the Hollywood movies, the cowboy type movies, kind of lost their luster big time. You rarely see any today. But we had, there were tons of them back then. So what? So they didn't need this car anymore. They put it in a canyon down there in the Hollywood Hills, and you can see it's all messed up. People have been shooting BB guns at it and 22s at it, but mostly it's been woodpeckers and just general rot, and wow, it is a mess. So, because of its historic value, though, the museum up in Nevada, Carson City, bought this engine and took it up there just for its historical value. And this year, about 4 months ago, we made a trade with them for this car and a very pretty engine over there down, we'll see later on, for one of our cars and an engine. It's supposed to be a 2-year deal. We would like to make it, we'd like to fix it up because we have the factory over here that can do that. Okay, that's enough done.
So good.
Northern Pacific Coast?
Oh, those are woodpeckers.
Yeah.
Oh, look, yeah.
It's an actual train, baby.
See, same color scheme. Before we talk about the car here, talk about these two gentlemen right here. The railroad industry is notable for mostly good things, and this is a kind of a funny story. Not funny, it's a bad story. 1882, the Chinese, who have been building railroads all over America since they came here during the gold rush times, and continually afterward. It's been close to 30 years or so they've been building railroads. They're so good at it that the other guys, mostly white guys, have built railroads that are still being built mostly up in the north, the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern, are jealous of them. And the first industry in America to become unionize their railroaders. So they get their lobbyists to kick them out of the country. Called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and only affected the railroad Chinese, not the Chinese who lived in towns, not the Chinese who were building the winery industry up in Napa or the levees here in the Sacramento Delta, but the railroad guys, and to the other Chinese, the railroad guys are actually a higher status because they have a craft. I mean, they can really do something like they can build a transcontinental railroad. So what? So taking their place after they get kicked out of the country seems to come in waves. In this case, the ones who become the Mexican-American track workers are called maintenance way in railroad talk, and you can see them right here. So that's how they get their start in the railroad industry. But I've talked to guys, we're in the same place up in Reno that the railroad guys are. When we get the train coming from Chicago back here to Sacramento, and we talk in the morning. The train leaves up there at 8:30. Usually it leaves at 8:30. And they said, you know, those two guys in your mannequins in the Railroad Museum, he says, those are our great-great-grandfathers. I mean, you can start out low on the totem pole, but you can work your way up over generations' time. So enough of that. Let's walk over this way just a few feet. And this is a passenger car early in the 1900s. And I use it because for two reasons. One, it kind of demonstrates the time when American railroads was really important, much more so than today. For one thing, the high time of American railroading is certainly not now. It wasn't even World War II. It was the early 1920s, actually almost exactly 100 years ago. So in terms of rail line miles, and miles of track, in 1922, we had 254,000 miles of track in America. Today we have 90,000. So you can see going way backward. Much of the rail has just obviously just been torn up and gone. Okay, go back to 1922. We had in this country, count them, 300 passenger car companies that ran passenger car trains 100 miles or more. That's a Class 1 railroad, the big standard gauge. So this was obviously the president's car of this railroad. Obviously very few people have heard of it, but it really was a real railroad at the time. And 300, people went by, go back 100 years, airplanes, and they're you wouldn't want to fly out long distance on an airliner. And, you know, there's no freeways yet. So trains are king of the hill. I mean, rails have been rails, the same kind of rails for an awfully long time. So this is how things were 100 years ago. And there was 300 of these. Okay, we're going this way now.
Those are really good mannequins. They even capture the pyramid.
I love that.
Before we had real refrigerator cars, we had rolling ice boxes. And this company in Sacramento, combined with that other name that you see down there, Fruit Growers Express, had 25,000 of these cars. And they could, the whole idea was they could get fresh fruits and vegetables from California's valleys, Sacramento Valley, San Joaquin Valley, Salinas Valley, you name it, and get it back east in less than a week and keep it cool. That's a 300-pound block of ice. Wow. It's coming out of the world's largest ice plant, which is 16 miles up the road here in Roseville, California. And that guy's an ice jockey, and they don't have a machine, a human being is pushing that block of ice out toward him there, down the slant there. He's dropping it in here with enough others, and if it's this time of year, certainly they'll keep it all the way. Middle of summer, they're going to probably have to stop and add more ice about 2 times. But it really did work, and it was called California's second gold rush, and 25,000 of these cars. And these went way even past normal refrigerator time. They were still using these up to about 1970.
Wow.
And real refrigerators, as we know them, came in, what, I don't know, 40 years before that. Okay, enough of that. We'll be shooting out this way.
crazy. You can go in it afterwards.
It's a gloomy day. I'm sure you can still see across there. And usually at this tour, I can entice a train to come here. But the main line of the north-south line, and well, that's a car, not a train. And anyway, we've got a tunnel. The last thing was going to build us a tunnel. And we got a tunnel going underneath the end of the parking lot, underneath 6 lines of the railroad track, and under Interstate 5, which if the East Coast and the counterpart would be Interstate 95 over there. The first building says Sacramento Locomotive Works. But please pass this around, and you can see the second building. It's a browner building, it's bigger. What I'm leading up to is that's part of the museum now. And the second building, there are 64 doors. And as we speak, behind each one of those doors is a car or an engine. Yes, 64. Is it open yet? Well, it's going to be. The whole idea is to get it ready to go. It's going to take some millions. We need that. See, the roofs are all bad shape. Some of that stuff dates back for 150 years, actually. I mean, it's really old. But it's huge. Each one of those buildings is about a block and a half long and about 60 feet high. And that's where they really did build the train. We're going to show you a couple examples of them in a little bit. Right now we're going to talk about passenger cars over here. And we'll pass another one around to try to show you that in the heyday of trains, it would be the late 1800s, early 1900s. Please pass this around. You had more than just sleeper cars and diner cars and coach cars. You had, that's called a palace car. And when you pass around, you notice it's just got nice furniture in there. Only 20 people can sit there. I mean, today, Amtrak would throw up if you had one of those on the train. What Amtrak hates is a non-revenue car. They want them all to be where you can make some money out of them, at least like a dining car, but it's not a coach car or a sleeper car. So, besides that kind of car, one made by Mr. Pullman, actually, he's the one that invents all this stuff. We had one called the salon car. Salon car, pretty neat, as long as this, 85 feet 6 inches. One half of it exactly is a beauty shop. The other half is a barber shop.
Nice.
So we don't have trains like that anymore. But, you know, it used to be, let's say back in the 1980s, even into the 1920s, 30s, 40s, even before the war, it was an experience. It was like going on a cruise because you had these different kind of cars you could interact with. And now for quickly, Mr. Pullman, another good guy, bad guy, kind of like Stanford. He builds this huge factory in the Chicago area in the 1860s. And he figures he can get this, the Civil War is just ending, and he